PowerPoint?
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Arya Rao. I'm the director of the Science Squad Corporation. And today we're going to host our second installment in the lecture series. We have Mr. Paul Filio presenting on political science, and I'll just let him get right to it.
Thank you, Arya. I'm going to see if I can go. Here we go. Oh, awesome. I'm assuming you can see this okay. Tonight we're going to talk about political science, but we're going to do it in a kind of an interesting way. I want to approach it from, as this outline talks about, first of all, what is science? And since this is the second presentation, maybe this is some good background information for you. I suspect that all of you probably have an idea of what science is and whether you've studied it or not, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And then from there, we're going to venture into this idea of the social sciences, and then specifically get into what political science is and what it's all about, right? As to who's talking here, a little information on me, okay? And you don't have to worry about all this kind of stuff here. I've been around for a while, but notice at the bottom where it talks about my motto, I know nothing. And what that's a reference to is the fact that living is kind of a learning experience, and school certainly is a formal type of deal, but you're actually going through that experience all the time. That is, I'm learning all the time. And so I'm constantly learning things, changing things around and doing things. And so even though I've worked in various fields, my particular field of training is history, but I've been involved as a social studies teacher for over 30, probably almost close to 40 years now. And as a result, have taught a number of classes related to this thing called political science, most notably AP US government, as you can see there, and AP comparative government. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well, okay? So, science, what is it? All right, here's a couple of definitions, as you can see. First, use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena, as well as the knowledge generated through this process. Well, what's all that mean, right? One, as you can see, science is certainly a tool, that is something that humans use to understand the world around this. This says universe, but I'll say world, because political science, it is a world, whereas hard science, for example, you might be looking at something with regards to the universe, such as what a black hole is or something like this. Notice the second option. It's a way to acquire knowledge, and knowledge is the important thing here, right? And that this knowledge will be used for something, that is, collecting knowledge and applying it is certainly very, very important for the scientists. And this can play out in lots of different fields, in lots of different ways. And a lot of times you might hear people talk about, well, this isn't going to help us, this knowledge. And in fact, it may help us. And that's very, very important to understand. Now, normally when we talk about science, as you can see there, observation and experimentation. There's a couple of things we're going to talk a little more about that, right? So the scientist has to observe, has to be able to see the reality. And we're going to talk more a little bit about that in a second also. Generally speaking, scientific discovery can be something that can take years, sometimes even longer. And it also plays into lots of different disciplines and previous existing knowledge bases, okay? But there's also another definition here, as you can see from this one. And this is the knowledge obtained by observing natural events and conditions in order to discover facts and formulate laws or principles that can be verified or tested. And it's very important to understand that, for example, there's a whole series of steps that go with this. So, for example, something called a hypothesis, okay? So, but again, go back to that first statement, observing natural events. And we mentioned that in the earlier slide, this one about observation and experimentation, as you can see there, right? That's very, very important. And how this kind of is going to play out in political science is something we're going to explore in just a little bit, okay? So notice laws. Usually when we talk about science, there's also the idea of theories, okay? And a theory is an example, for example, of Darwin's theory of evolution, to use a very well-known famous theory. That theory is assumed to has been proven. So it's taken on a little bit different status, but it still is considered to be a theory, right? Now, along with this is the scientific method. And this particular slide kind of breaks it down into 8 little different steps. And there's lots of different ways you can break that down, right? The question obviously is something that you have to look at to examine. So for example, when I use the astronomy example of black holes, well, you might say, okay, what is a black hole? How does it develop? How did we get black holes? You know, were they always around? All those are questions, right? And so a scientist, an astrophysicist probably, I'm guessing, would be out there researching this particular topic, looking at what they call the literature. And the literature just refers to all the writing that's been done on this particular topic,
Hey, Mr. Filio, I hate to cut you off for a second, but your PowerPoint's not showing on the screen.
Okay. Is it showing now? I'll start it again. There we go. Do you see it now?
Nope, it's the green button on the left-hand side. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
No problem. Green button on the left-hand side. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, okay.
Should pop up in a sec.
Okay.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. So you're seeing it now? Okay.
I don't see the PowerPoint, but I do see your screen.
Okay.
So that's perfect. All right. Sorry, everybody. We'll get right back to it.
Now do you see it? I've gone full screen.
Switch to your other window with the PowerPoint in it, and then we'll be able to see it. No. Go back to the screen sharing and then just click normally.
Okay. I see something called full screen.
Yeah. Click that.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to start screen share. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to go here.
Yep. There you go.
Okay.
All right. Back to it.
So you got to it. Okay. So, my apologies. So here we go, right? So there's our definition of science I was talking about earlier, right? There's the other definition, the one about observations and observing, etc. And then here's our scientific method, right? And as you can see, hold on a second. Now can you see full screen? Because I'm going to double check. I'm assuming you can. Okay. Anything different? Okay. If you let me know if you don't see it full screen. So under scientific method, you see ask a question, research a topic, and I was using the example of black holes, right? So in this example of black holes, I would develop some hypothesis about the black holes. So for example, if I was to wanted to discuss the explanation for the cause of the black holes, then I would develop a hypothesis. But in order to do that, I have to be able to test the hypothesis, and that would be experimentation, gathering data, looking at the results, drawing conclusions, and then communicating those results. And that's a very important part of being a scientist, that is of using science and using the scientific method. It is not done in isolation. It is a process that happens in a very public setting, so that everything is shared. And in fact, one of the major problems today for scientists is that there is so much information out there that it's actually hard sometimes to stay what they call current when it comes to the development of certain, findings, etc. Right? So, hypothesis, here's just a very short little deal. Explanations based on scientific research, and that can be tested. Sometimes you might call it an educated guess, as though maybe your high school science teacher might not like this. Sometimes if then, something that is if A, then B, because of C, right? And so you have this hypothesis out there that you can then test, okay? How do you test it? Well, you have to then come up with something called an experiment, okay? And an experiment is something that can be run a number of times. A lot of times it's going to have some variables, things that you can change, maybe one or more. And as you can see by this slide, sometimes it's going to be an experimental setup or a controlled setup. And I'll go on. There's a controlled, in which you test only one factor at a time. So in a political science setting, for example, if I were going to want to look at the attitudes of voters and what influences them to vote in a certain way, I might then have a controlled experiment out there that maybe changes only one variable so that I can see if that changes or not. So I might look at economic standing, for example. Control group is the group that sometimes the scientist does nothing with, that is, they're the base. And here you can think of the drug test that uses a placebo. Drug companies, pharmaceutical companies are constantly testing drugs. And these are sometimes called blind studies in which even the researchers don't actually know, that is, the people giving the drug don't actually know what they're giving, okay, so that they can't influence the results in some way or another. Experimental group, is the where the scientist is change something in it, okay, etc. Right? Now, this all leads us to this thing called social sciences. That is, generally speaking, when we think of sciences like physics, biology, chemistry, sometimes a term you might hear is hard sciences, okay? Whereas social sciences, and there's several different definitions of this, and here's a couple here. This is looking at, it means to be, as you see here, a social being, okay? That is looking at humans. And it can be humans as individual as you and I, such as a psychologist might look at, or this field of psychology, or it can be large scale social movements, such as a sociologist. It can be demographics, which is population studies. And notice the key there is scientific study, right, of human society and social relationships. That is, what happens when humans interact and how do they interact, okay, and what's going on here. The reason there's this term social sciences or hard science versus soft science sometimes has to do with the fact that it's that you have human beings involved. If you remember, I was mentioning earlier that for the scientists, if they could strip out the role of the human, they would, okay, because they're looking at what they sometimes call the facts. There's a very famous TV show from the 1960s called Dragnet, and the main protagonist was always interviewing, he was a police detective, and he was always interviewing his suspects and witnesses and what have you. And if they would start to meander off in some direction about something or other, he would always say, "Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts." That is, he didn't want their opinions, he wanted what they saw, you know, and et cetera, what was going on with that, right? Now, here's a couple of things in terms of social science disciplines, right? So they use behavior analysis to examine human behavior, right? You can see there's a good example of some human behavior, right? And here, notice collecting statistics. So for the social scientists, as opposed to the scientists, statistics sometimes is going to play a role. So when I use that example of voter attitudes, you know, why would somebody vote on something in their particular way? I might looking at statistical kinds of collections, and that does sometimes mean in experiments, looking at what people have written and attempt to try to figure out what they are about, right? Here's an example here where you can see personal beliefs lead to personal behaviors, then lead to personal benefits, which influence personal beliefs, and it's kind of a circle that goes all the way around, right? And there's an example of somebody who unfortunately maybe needed to work on some of those personal behaviors, etc., right? Here's another example. And I'll go through this quickly, right? So here, political science. Now we're to the rub, right? That we're right to where we need. Organizations. So the focus is the organizations, and so a lot of times that is a governmental organization, developed to make rules and laws for their society. The basic question, how are people governed? Well, there's actually more than that basic question, as we're going to see, right? And here you can see a couple of examples, a couple of photographs. But let's talk about this why of political science. Aristotle and Plato, and Aristotle was a sort of a follower of Plato, and was influenced by him. And he talked about how politics is out there everywhere, that politics is everything. And in fact, you've been living in a sort of political bubble since really the election. This is a very unique kind of a situation we've been in for the last really several months, in which politics has really taken the front row seat over everything. But politics is made of lots of different things, right? So example, here we have political science. Now this says scientific study of politics and government. Well, okay, that certainly is the attempt to apply these scientific procedures, these scientific practices, such as the experimentation, hypothesis, theory, etc., and talk about it. It doesn't have all the answers. This cartoon makes a little fun of this whole deal in a unfortunately sad way, right? The young child is saying, I'm hungry, and the adult is saying, stop talking politics, right? The metaphor here, by the way, is that could be sort of the gentleman sitting there gorging himself, could be rich nations, whereas that child could refer to underdeveloped or less developed countries, right? How is politics scientific? Well, we look at the different branches, okay? And it attempts to kind of put all this together. And as you can see, there's lots of different branches here, okay? There's the idea of political theory, international politics, domestic politics. Domestic refers to within the country. International is also similar to comparative in that we're comparing different countries, more than different countries. And then you get into all the different kind of subsets. Notice public administration. Somebody could get a degree in that and actually go out and learn how to work in government, to be what sometimes is called a bureaucrat, right? Here's a little more humorous aspect of it. Who gets what, when, and how? And that resonates well not only in politics, but also resonates well in terms of economics, right? Because in economics, it's the questions of scarcity. And scarcity is a question of who gets what, when, and how. And the when and the how refers to who makes those decisions as to who gets what, right? In this case, we want to make sure that people are happy, that they are safe. The government does provide some of that. Groucho Marx saw it a little bit different, but he was talking in the 1930s and 40s, the art of finding trouble everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedy. So you could see that people have strong opinions about politics, political science, and government in general, right? That they can look at it in lots of different ways. Right? Here's some other definitions. Means through which individuals and group interests compete to shape government's impacts on society's problems and goals. Another one, the process by which rulers are selected and empowered to make decisions, take actions to attain common goals, and reconcile conflicts within a political community, right? All these, again, are shaped at this idea that individuals have to work together. Originally, we didn't have to work together, thousands of years ago, right? And in the period of history before writing, for example, was invented, which is about 5 or 10,000 years ago, human beings had to work together on a very, very small scale. So they didn't have huge impact on the environment, right? Now, big impact on the environment. We work on a big scale. Human beings are settled down. We live together in very close quarters. We have to be able to work together. And governments have to provide that help for us, but we also can make up the government. And that's when you get into different types of government as well, right? Here's some more deal about this. The cartoon's kind of interesting in that I like your vote. What do you have to offer? The power to take his money and give it to you. And the gentleman says, oh, he's got my vote. This is kind of an interesting little cartoon because it's talking about redistribution of wealth. which again, notice how we talk about economics a little bit, but it's also political science, because wealth is something that's out there and communities have to deal with it. Societies have to deal with the sharing of wealth, right? Are we going to be happy with these decisions? And so one way when we look at the decisions that made is we react in a way that we start to utilize this thing called politics. And we certainly haven't seen this again since the most recent election. Individual group seeks power by mobilizing support for their particular point of view, the ability to get what you want by obtaining power. Now, this thing called power, that's an interesting subject as well, because that certainly is something that's very important to understanding what political science is. When we think of power, well, let's take a look, right? Here we have the ability of a person, group, or nation to get what it wants, right? In this case, you can see a U.S. Military, right? Governments can use soft power in which they try to persuade or try to influence. Maybe they're going to grant some economic type of advantages, money, something like this, or they can use military, right? But it's the ability of this person, group, nation get what it wants, okay? And what does it want? Well, that's the interesting thing, right? We have to have rules, right? Some other definitions: A has power over B to the extent that A can get B to do something that B would not otherwise do. Notice A exercises power that affects B in a manner contrary to B's interests. And so, as you can see from this picture, I'm assuming this is North Korea, that the form of power that's being exercised there is being exercised by a type of government that we sometimes call the dictatorship, an authoritarian type of government, right? And notice political scientists, right? Because they're the ones that have to kind of try to figure all this out, right? And they can study conflicts, but as you saw from that other chart, I'll go back to it a second. This one here, political scientists can work in lots of different realms, okay? Lots of different places, okay? Political geography, the idea of public law, governments, etc., right? So lots of different areas that political scientists can work. Some of the concepts that are out there in political science that you might be looking at: legitimacy is a government that's empowered to consider to be the legitimate government, that is the one that's supposed to be in power, right? And you can see there's some aspects of how a government becomes legitimate. So, for example, in the United States, nobody could take power and claim to be legitimate unless it's through a presidential election every 4 years. That is, I can't go out there in the middle of the street and call myself president because nobody would believe me. They would not think I'm the legitimate ruler because I haven't gone through that process of being elected in an election, right? Other concepts: sovereignty, authority, order, community, government, etc., and lots of different concepts in this thing called political science. And it's fascinating. I always find this really fascinating to look at, right? How the rules play out. Why do people obey rules? When you think of an example, why do people observe stop signs and traffic lights? I mean, there's generally 98% of the time, 99% of the time, there's not going to be a policeman there to enforce the rule, right? But people still observe them. Well, why is that? What is it? We might say, well, they do it because they've been trained to by the educational authority, schools, teach students to follow the rules, etc. Right? There's also safety issues. Hey, if I go through the red light, there's a possibility some other car is going to hit me and it might hurt me or kill me even. Okay. Other types of concepts: the nation state. This is a very important concept today in political science. It's a fairly recent concept. That is, it's only been around for about 150 or so years. And it comes out of the monarchies that were found before that, and etc. So it's something that has not been around that long, and there's a lot of discussion about whether it's actually still a reasonable model for us. Is it something that we want to continue to have people work in, right? And so that, and then here's some other terms: government, society, authoritarian, democratic. Okay. consensus, how people arrive at a decision. Consensus means everybody usually has to agree, and that can be very difficult, right? Here's some of these again: power, you've seen before, right? Common good, politics, this human activity. And as I said today, we really are involved in politics, okay? And notice the direct democracy. We are a representative democracy, and that's our elected officials represent us, okay? They can't possibly represent everybody, so we have to have a government in which a majority minority situation applies. And when people are unhappy, as we've been seeing ever since the election of President Trump, then they have recourse to try to do things. But in terms of removing President Trump from power, as far as it being legitimate, that would have to wait until 4 years from now when there would be another election. Okay. Conclusion, real quick. I think because it's been about 25 minutes, as I'm hoping. Politics is the junction subject of the social sciences, born out of history and philosophy, but drawing on the insights of economics, sociology, and to a lesser extent the study of law, psychology, and geography. It kind of pulls it all together, but it's a very fascinating subject, and it's one that I really enjoy working with. So I will stop there. Okay, I'm going to exit out of this. Okay, and see if there's any questions or anything I want to talk about.
Perfect. So if you have any questions for Mr. Filio, you can type them in the chat now, or you can email them to the scisquad at gmail.com.
I don't know why I'm not hearing you.
Oh, sorry about that.
Slide share.
Anyhow, you can.
You can hear me. I can't hear you.
Yeah. At any rate, you can email them to the scisquad at gmail.com, or you can type them in the chat.
Oh, I know why. Hold on, my sound bar went off. Sorry. Hold on.
Oh, not a problem.
Now it's on. Okay, there we go.
All right.
Could you hear me okay, other than that?
Yeah, it was all good.
Okay, great.
Well, given that you guys don't have any questions, I'd just like to say thank you for Mr. Filio for coming in. It was a really entertaining lecture. I'm sure you all enjoyed it. I did, for sure. And I hope to see you back next week for Dr. Chris Schoenbaum from the University of Chicago. And have a good week.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, send me an invite for the one next week. I'd like to listen in.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, you take care.
Bye.